Easter egg. I call it Easter egg content, like for the people that are watching the YouTube video, that the people on the podcast don't get. Usually do something random. March Madness. You have any March Madness? You have any dogs in the fight?
Not really. I mean, I'm from Buffalo, so like a lot of the people around here like Syracuse, but I'm a fan kind of, but I wasn't like sad when they lost or anything.
The Qs went down. Like they went down kind of like, I don't want to say they went down like chumps, but the reality was I'm a Qs grad, and I mean, it was fun to get caught up in the Buddy Boeheim thing. But when he wasn't making the shots, it just wasn't going to happen.
Kind of obvious what was going to happen.
It just wasn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. And but it was still fun. I mean, he's etched his name into Syracuse basketball lore forever.
For sure.
And just from like a script standpoint, it's one of the best stories I can remember. The picture of him, little 3-year-old him, like running around with Carmelo Anthony.
That was a cool video. Yeah.
So it's very rare in sports, I think, that you see something like come full circle like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's do this thing. Who are the 49ers going to take at number 3? That and more this week on the couch. Chris Trapasso. Chris, who are the 49ers taking? Why did they trade 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick?
It's got to be either Justin Fields, who I really think they're going to pick, or Trey Lance. And Trey Lance, the way that I could be sold on him being the guy is if the 49ers really are like, okay, let's run it back with Jimmy Garoppolo one more time. Even if he ultimately gets banged up like he seemingly does every year, Trey Lance will get like a half season of a red shirt, and then we can just let the offense really take off with Trey Lance because he's such a good fit for that Kyle Shanahan offense. But I think Justin Fields is the perfect quarterback for Kyle Shanahan, and he gives you that ability to play outside of structure, the arm talent. He's very, very accurate with the football. He's kind of a different quarterback than what Kyle Shanahan has had in the past, but he's not just a game manager. And although I don't think he's amazing outside of structure, he definitely gives you more creativity and athleticism than Mac Jones.
Yeah, Mac Jones. That's the name, right? No, Elliot Christ posted this morning that at least in one betting market, Jones is the favorite to go at number 3. And Chris, the name list is getting longer of who is saying don't sleep on this, right? Daniel Jeremiah, Chris Sims, Chris Mortensen.
That was a
Mike
big one.
Lombardi. So, look, I don't want to get into something with the Mac Jones stan out there, but you can see across big boards, and this could be one of the situations where draft Twitter or the draft community is just out of sync with the NFL. But Mac Jones is constantly like, where's he at on your big board, Chris? Like 28 or something like that.
Yeah, 28, end of the first round.
Yeah, that's where, if you're ranking him as a prospect, that's where it seems like he belongs. So the idea of them trading up from 12 to 3 to get Mac Jones just seems incoherent. But what's fascinating about it, and why look, you do cover this thing long enough, and you learn not to dismiss anything, because even if it's not this thing, something as outlandish as Mac Jones going number 3 happens every year not necessarily in the draft, but in the NFL. Decision makers, So the question is, and we were talking about this before we went on the air, and Chris Trapasso, first time, should long overdue NFL draft, CBS. So happy to have you on. There's just so many great people in the draft world. There's no way I can have them all on in the month of April. But Chris leading off, we were talking about this, the NFL draft as an on-ramp to football obsession. And,
it is.
And why I love it, Chris, and I'm fond of saying, teams can't lie in the draft. When you write that name on the card, you can't lie. Sometimes it is a result of a jumbled process where there's a tug of war with an organization, but it still is very meaningful. It's the biggest statement we get probably of teams saying, this is how we're going to win football games. And Paul said what they think of their current roster, how they envision players fitting into their scheme. There's layers upon layers of information. And when we try to unpeel the layers, because it makes me cry, I said praying for your 49ers fans. Like, if they go Mac Jones at number 3, I'm going to feel for them. But we peel back the layers, and the idea here is, Chris, that Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan, they've had success with Brian Greasy, with Jake Plummer, with Kirk Cousins, with Jimmy Garoppolo. These accurate, quick processor in the pocket players within structure that can unlock the value of a scheme. Jared Goff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, that's the kind of quarterback they like. And when I say they, I just mean that whole system, right? And that's who they're going to take because he fits that paradigm. But like you said, which I think is the more compelling paradigm, is no, we want to try something different. What if we have somebody who can add value outside of the value that the play creates? So we'll find out. Lance or Fields, I prefer Lance. Either way, I think they both make sense in the idea of let's add a dimension to the 49ers offense that they haven't had. So then the question becomes, let's assume that and Zach Wilson, number 2 in Penn. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Yeah. And, we can talk a little about Zach Wilson, but then the more interesting thing is, because now we can start playing that trade flurry really set off the dominoes, Chris, in our head of let's start envisioning the draft. Let's start envisioning like what's really going to go down. So that fourth quarterback, whether it's Lance or Fields, give me a team or two that you think are the most likely where they then will end up.
So are we assuming Mac Jones is going number 3 overall?
No craziness. Although obviously that would be a boon for your Carolinas and Denvers and so on. Let's assume that it is Fields or Lance. So there's just one of those consensus top 4 quarterbacks left. Where does he end up?
I think Lance, number 8 overall to the Carolina Panthers, that would be a tremendous landing spot for him to get what I have seen almost firsthand in my backyard here in Buffalo, to give Trey Lance the Matt Barkley, Josh Allen experience, to have it would be kind of flipped, but to have Trey Lance, this tremendous physical and athletic specimen that isn't the quickest processor, only started 1 season at North Dakota State. It was 19 years old, to learn from the opposite quarterback in him in Teddy Bridgewater. I think number 8 overall, that would be awesome for him. And we know that the Panthers are ready to move on from Teddy Bridgewater. They would move him in a trade for Deshaun Watson just a few weeks ago. But I think they realize, Matt Rule understands that they're not ready to compete for a Super Bowl yet. Maybe they want to take the next step to 7, 8, 9 wins. Maybe they could squeak into the playoffs next season. But give Teddy Bridgewater the starting job. Let Trey Lance sit behind him, learn, soak up as much knowledge in the film room and watching in practice and in games to then be ready. Get that Patrick Mahomes redshirt season. So I think either Lance or Fields, Carolina seems to be their floor in terms of where they would be picked. Maybe the Broncos with their new GM, George Payton, who is in Minnesota for the acquisition of Brett Favre and for the signing of Kirk Cousins, 2 splashy acquisitions at the quarterback spot. They could move up maybe to number 6, to number 7 to get in front of the Carolina Panthers at 8, but I can't see either of those quarterbacks lasting even to pick number 10.
Yeah, that seems right to me. And then we'll see about Mac Jones, in New England, like if Mac Jones is on the board when New England's on the clock, we'll all sit up a little straighter. We'll be listening. Chicago for Mac Jones.
Yeah, that was pretty popular as of like a week ago. And then now it's like, oh, Mac Jones is not going to get outside the top 10. Right. And now he's going to go number 3.
This is how Ryan Pace, they set up the hero narrative. Look, we got Mac Jones. He said it was number 3. Look where we got him. Yeah. But then again, the Bears, the Steelers, these are teams that seem more like they're focused on winning this year than a quarterback. The Saints, Mac Jones, we'll see. But I think you're right to say that Fields or Lance, quarterback 4 off the board in the top 10. And Carolina seems like the team that is most, I don't want to say desperate, because I don't necessarily get a sense of desperation. It's more just like laser focus. Like, we're going to improve our quarterback position. We're going to do something about it. I mean, they put the number 8 pick on the table for Matthew Stafford, which some might argue is more valuable than the whole package that the Lions got. Yeah. There is the Lions at number 7. Tell me if I'm crazy here. With Matt Ryan having a $40+ million cap hit next year, the Falcons take them out of consideration. Or if they fall in love with Lance or Fields, hey, maybe pay $40 million for a backup or nothing next year, because you can't take a quarterback at number 4 and not play him for 2 years, right?
Yeah, in today's NFL, I don't think you can. And with that recent restructure that Matt Ryan did of his contract, it's going to be more difficult for them to even cut him until the start of 2023. So
Right.
in today's NFL, you can't, if you draft Justin Fields there at 4 because you just like his abilities, I don't think you can sit someone for 2 full seasons. That just hasn't happened really in 10 or 15 years, if not longer than that. I mean, think going back to Eli Manning or even before that, the last time that a quarterback sits for 2 seasons. So yeah, I think the Falcons with that restructure and with how signing Matt Ryan to that deal in 2018, that just made it very difficult for them to move on from him. One of the more player-friendly deals that we've seen. I think that indicates they're going to go probably defense, maybe low-key wide receiver, given Julio Jones's age. But yeah, the draft really starts for me at number 4 overall.
And then if it's Carolina calling, how's Trey Fontenot, who came over from within the division? Think about trading within the division. A trade down also makes sense for Atlanta. I mean, they could trade down to Carolina or Denver and still get maybe the top corner on the board. And then the draft. Let's play the draft. Let's go ahead and play the draft a little bit, and then we'll get into some bigger topics. And then you get my Cincy, and if Mac Jones goes number 3, they're a winner. If they don't have clarity about which tackle or offensive weapon they want, and now all of a sudden Fields or Lance is available at their pick, at worst, maybe Fields and Lance are available. And how amazing would it be, by the way? Like Chris Greer would have to do the ultimate stuck the landing if Miami still gets the first non-quarterback off the board, trading down from 3 to 6.
That would be unbelievable. And he's navigated the last couple of drafts and future drafts so well. And it was funny. We had about 15 minutes on Friday when the first trade happened between the Dolphins and the 49ers, where I was like, man, the Dolphins moving to 12, like they're really risking not getting one of the top 4 pass catchers. And then they move back up to 6. Like, okay, they still want one of these guys. What you just laid out could happen, and they could be sitting there with the pick of the litter between Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, and Kyle Pitts. I'm low-key rooting for that. That would be so much fun with Gesicki and Kyle Pitts, those receivers to help Tua. I think that would be an absolute blast if he went number 6 overall.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun to be a Dolphins fan. We haven't said that for a while.
Yeah.
It's fun to be a Dolphins fan, and they're fully behind Tua this year. But they're fully behind Tua. I was just on the radio in Honolulu, and down there they're happy. They're happy to see this great. And this is a ripple effect, right? Like what we're sorting through. Chris, we could spend the whole hour doing this, just sorting through the ripple effects. There's ripple effects for the Jets because that's whenever the Zach Wilson pick. It was also the day of Zach Wilson's pro day, right? So it was like play tectonics of NFL in motion. You could feel it, it registers on the Richter scale. So Cincinnati, you have Penei Sewell, probably ahead of Slater at this point on most boards. Most he goes to Cincinnati at 5, or maybe Cincinnati takes a pass catcher. If Sewell falls to 6, does that give Miami pause, or do you think they're really zeroing in on somebody that's not him?
I think they're almost doing what I think we heard the Jets did in 2018, moving from 6 to 3. Like, hey, we just want the second quarterback off the board. Like there are a few guys like Baker Mayfield, we like Josh Allen, we like Sam Darnold. We just want the chance to get one. Especially the fact that there are 2 Alabama wide receivers that have a connection with Tua. I think they're like, hey, if it's Jalen Waddle, great. If it's Devontae Smith, great. I don't think they would go Penei Sewell. And the one thing I will say about the Bengals, it seems like the low-hanging fruit. Like they should pick Penei Sewell to protect Joe Burrow, given how bad the line was, the injury. But I will say that I think there is a bigger drop-off at wide receiver, and we're kind of grouping Kyle Pitts into that group. After that top tier that there is at the offensive tackle spot. So conceivably, the Bengals could pick Jamar Chase to pair with Joe Burrow, and then at the top of round 2, still get someone like Alex Leatherwood or Samuel Cosme. They could still get a quality starting, like instant impact left tackle or right tackle. If you pick a receiver, there's still some good ones, but I think the Elijah Moores, the Terrace Marshalls will probably be gone at the end of the first. Then in the second round, you're looking at prospects that are clearly a full step below those premier talents at the receiver spot that you can get at number 5 overall.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, these are the conversations that are happening now in NFL draft, not in literally in the war room, but in the people that are going to be in that war room. And it's fun. I mean, in some ways, getting engaged with the draft, Chris, the way we do is a lot like fantasy football, in the sense that you're trying to predict or project thinking, and then how all these things mix together, how all these factors mix together to create all these outcomes. And so Cincinnati has a fork in the road. Miami, again, if Sewell's there, do they pause and consider it? I think they like Hunt and Jackson. I think they have someone in mind. But, one of those top 4 pass catchers go there. Detroit seems like a reasonable team to take one of those top 4 pass catchers. But Micah Parsons, who just had a terrific pro day, do you think he's in play? Dan Campbell said Lance Briggs, Brian Urlacher. These are the kind of, Luke Kuechly. Could we see Parsons go high as number 7?
I think that is his ceiling. I don't think he'll go inside the top 6 for a lot of the reasons that you just outlined. And with that selection, number 7 overall, how I've thought about that, at least over the weekend when we've had this repositioning inside the top 6, that pick will show who really is in control with this new Lions regime. If it's Brad Holmes, their GM, that comes over kind of with Jared Goff from LA, they go wide receiver. He had Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp and a few seasons of Brandon Cooks. They had Sammy Watkins for a season. They go receiver. Then Brad Holmes is like, hey, we want to put some more quality pieces around Jared Goff after losing some of those in free agency. If it's Micah Parsons, I think Dan Campbell, for a lot of the reasons that you just pointed out, is the guy that's saying, hey, we want to be this old school 1990s hard-nosed football team that drafts a linebacker inside the top 10 and is not apologizing about it.
Right. Kneecap biters.
Kneecap biters.
That's going to stick with us. I mean, hey, whatever comes out of the Lions regime era with Dan Campbell, we'll always have that. Yeah. And I won't totally rule out the Lions on quarterback, just because I know I have faith at least that Brad Holmes, and I guess you have to say the same thing about Terry Fontenot. I mean, if Fontenot and Holmes go through their process on Lance or Fields, and it just checks the box of like, you have a chance to get a franchise quarterback, it may not have another chance to get somebody that has that level of potential. I mean, it's a tremendous quarterback class this year.
It is very good.
And then we have Carolina number 8. We talked about quarterback. They could go any number of directions. They could even, and they're a team that could look at a wide receiver, one of these top wide receivers. Denver defense, probably defensive backfield. Dallas has to go defensive backfield. Yeah. Yes. I know there's if Pitts falls. Ooh, well, I mean, yeah. Actually, if Kyle Pitts falls to number 10, this is like CD Lamb all over again.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to get to Pitts' floor, right? Then there's the Giants who signed Kenny Golladay. But if we do the dominoes, Chris, the Giants have a chance to take a Jalen Waddle or a Devontae Smith here, probably, right? Do they, or does Golladay close the door on that?
I still think that Dave Gettleman is trying to prove to everyone that he made the right pick, taking Daniel Jones at number 6 overall. So I think for as much as Dave Gettleman is the quintessential old school football guy, drafting deep tackles and picking running backs number 2 overall, I think now he realizes, like, hey, if I don't give Daniel Jones more weapons, and he has, then I might not have another job in the NFL. So I think the floor for Kyle Pitts or that last offensive skill position player at the receiver spot is probably the Giants. I mean, maybe one of them lasts to number 12 to the Eagles. I think they would be happy to give Jalen Hurts one of those guys. Just as they have this kind of, I think, 1-year experiment with Jalen Hurts to see if he's the guy. Then they've loaded up. They could have 3 first-round picks in 2022 to move up if they need to, or if they're bad again, they'll have plenty of an early pick to pick a quarterback. But no, I don't think the signing of Kenny Golladay closes the door on Kyle Pitts going number 11 overall to the Giants, just because in year 3 of the Daniel Jones experiment, it's put up or shut up time for both Daniel Jones and for Dave Gettleman, the GM.
I love it, Chris. I love the way that you present it as, what's Dave Gettleman thinking, or what's his motivation going to be? And like you said, there's a layer to it too of who has the power. And it's not always clear, We wondered whether Gettleman would be basically emasculated by Joe Judge when he came on last year, but it doesn't seem like that's what happened. This team still has Gettleman's fingerprints all over it. And then you have the Eagles, and it's good that the Eagles got an extra first-round pick. The Eagles have 3 first-round picks next year. So if it doesn't work out with Hurts, 3 first-round picks in one draft, I mean, you can move them up number 1 with that,
Yeah.
So Eagles fans, what Howie Roseman did is going to help. It would be very much like last year again for them to see a elite pass catcher fall 1 pick short of their pick, and then have to settle. They take. I don't know. The Eagles have needs everywhere. I mean, the Eagles are a good candidate to take a tackle, and then we'll stop with this exercise. We will, but certainly, I hope it gets everyone's juices flowing out there, thinking about these names, thinking about how these players are going to see their destinies change, these teams, the coaches, the decision makers involved. It's the NFL draft. We love it. And once March Madness is over here, I think it's going to really get a lot more attention. But the trades release that initial adrenaline. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, because you're very much in tune with this. How much how the team's approaching this year going to be different because of players not having 2020 tape, or because of no combine, or is that something that's overblown, really? Or maybe just the bad organizations will get flustered by that, but the good organizations are going to stick with what they do?
Yeah, I think the bad organizations are going to really allow opt-out and things like that related to COVID really sway their boards. Micah Parsons should still be considered, a elite linebacker prospect. Rashad Bateman, the wide receiver from Minnesota, played a few games, then opted out. So I don't think that it will change too much. The fact that we had like an abridged season for a lot of conferences and we had some marquee opt-outs. Penei Sewell is going top 5. It doesn't matter at this point. So I don't think too many teams will let that say, hey, I don't like Micah Parsons as much because I haven't seen his film. I think in general, if we're looking from a grand scale, like the fact that some of these players didn't play and they're really going to be fresh coming into what will be their 21 or 22-year-old seasons in the NFL, I think that's actually an advantage. We'll see how it ultimately plays out, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that Micah Parsons didn't have 300 head-on-head collisions and risk that injury last season. Yeah.
Well, maybe even in this era of player empowerment, Chris, you may see like someone who, when they're a true sophomore, situated as a top 5 pick, say, I'm just not going to come back. I'll wait, or whatever the rules are. I know the NCAA and NFL will probably put their heads together to try to keep that from happening. But you're right. If you're an elite prospect and not playing for a year, it doesn't affect the view of you in the NFL, then why risk anything? It's fascinating. Insurance markets should get on that, right? Like, pass out bigger insurance policies.
There you go.
Maybe a more interesting change, Chris, and Chris and I go way back, because back when it wasn't cool to care so much about the draft,
like a 5th-round linebacker like Kevin Reddick from UNC.
Right.
Remember that guy?
I mean, those were the guys we were making profiles about on Draft Guys TV. You were there, and what's great about the draft as a subject to dive in the deep end is it puts you in touch with football philosophy. It puts you in touch with understanding like usage of players and schemes, all these stories we talk about, like almost personality, analyzing these decision makers and understanding what their philosophy of team building is. There's all these different ways, and what it introduces you to all the time, Chris, is how the game changes, because it changes gradually enough that it's not necessarily dramatic. But if we look back to 15 years ago, it's very different. Things we talk about are different, right? Like 15 years ago, we said, if a quarterback exclusively played in the shotgun in college, that's a ding on him. Now we don't even care. We don't even ask the question, does he take snaps under center? It doesn't matter. The NFL game and the college game have merged in some ways, and other things that happen. You also see how teams allocate assets and their philosophy of position value, and free agency is always interesting for that. But what I want to ask you about that's on the front right now is the data coming in from the RFID chips in the shoulder pads, right? I think it was Cynthia Freeland who put out there a thread about teams are looking at that data more than the 40, and they're looking at it as more predictive. And the 40 is going to become more meaningless. Does this fit into our conversation of why there was no combine not really mattering and teams trusting pro days, or teams basically already kind of knowing based on this stuff? How much is all this new data changing how teams are scouting players?
It's changing it a lot. I mean, we've had next gen stats now for what, 5 or 6 years,
Right.
and that's just what the public has had. And we know that NFL teams have access to even more layered data. So I think, for the NFL to not have their combine, I think they're kind of like, we don't really need it anymore. That most teams, if not every team, is subscribing to analytics in some way, whether having a department or outsourcing it or using PFF, Football Outsider, stuff like that. So I think the on-field speed, and we see it all the time. I mean, that is one of the biggest curiosities of the NFL draft, that you can watch a player, and I know that you know this, Sig. You can watch a player that looks like he is a 4.6 guy on film, and then he runs 4.3 at the combine, and it's like, what happened? Did he just train really well? Something when he puts on the pads, like, what is that? And we see obviously the opposite, where players run really fast on or at the 40, and then they're really slow on film. So I don't understand how, or I don't believe that in the future, next 3 to 5 years, that there's going to be nearly as much emphasis on really any of the pro day workouts, and certainly the 40-yard dash, because of not just the speed that we're getting from these chips, but all of the movement, the twitchiness, the suddenness, how they take on blocks. If you're a linebacker, things like that the public doesn't necessarily, and even the media, have access to, but the teams do, that they're getting real-time data about how these players are behaving on the field. And that's more important than anything else.
It's fun because I bet you, Chris, like, I'm thinking of like C.O. Brocato, the legendary scout, that old school scouts still already knew this stuff like 50 years ago, right? When I was out on the practice circuit, the all-star game circuit, every now and then, Chris, I would have a note like, his top speed is whatever it takes to make the play. Like if he sees the ball in the air, he can find something. Or alternatively, especially if you're talking about safeties, I know the safeties, the top 2 safeties are pretty high on your big board, and it's certainly a position that teams are valuing more and more, that whatever safety's time speed is, it's his diagnosis of the play, it's his read on the play. And a smart 4.6 is better than a reckless 4.4, So there's so many layers to this and putting context in. But the one thing that we don't learn a lot from is a 40-yard dash. We learn how fast a player can run a 40-yard dash. It's different technique. It's just a whole different environment. And again, the old school guys are probably well ahead of the curve on this. And the NFL is coming all the way back around to that because of the data. It makes sense, and I think it's something interesting to watch, and I'd love it because I know I can geek out with you, maybe, and I think even some of the audience. It's crazy. Eric Stoner's out there. Eric Stoner's another draft OG.
Yes, he is.
And he's out there. We like to obsess about this stuff, and we like to take the micro, which is like this draft that's coming up, and always jump back to the macro. Of course, there's fantasy football in the background, the NFL skill positions. Najee Harris, Travis Etienne, first round picks, you think, this year, or teams continuing to wise up to spending less resources instead of more at running back?
I think at least one of them will go in the first round still. That a lot of times, I'll say this, maybe you say it, that like the NFL has probably smartened up collectively, but all it takes is one team. There could be one team, one head coach, one GM, one director of college scouting that is like, we need Travis Etienne on our roster to win now. And I think, for as much as I know you've been on it, I've been on the don't draft a running back in the first round bandwagon for years now. Even when like Leonard Fournette went inside the top 5 in 2017, even at that point, we were like, you shouldn't pick a running back that high. Right. The one thing, though, I do think is interesting, that because we've seen a shrinking in how long a GM or a head coach gets before he's ultimately dubbed a failure or gets or a success, it wouldn't be crazy if we see a little uptick in the draft value of a running back where GMs are like, hey, Travis Etienne, if I can get 3 Alvin Kamara type seasons from him,
Right.
and then I'll worry about the contract later, and maybe we'll let him go. Maybe we'll sign him to a deal that doesn't have a lot of fully guaranteed dollars into it. I'll deal with that in 4 years. I think growing up, you watching football, me watching football, it was 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And then if your team wasn't really doing it, then the GM would get fired, the coach would get fired. Today's NFL, by like year 2 or year 3, if you're not turning things around, you're going to be out the door. So that's like the one thing, always trying to like play devil's advocate with myself, that I'm like, hey, I wouldn't pick Travis Etienne in the first round or Najee Harris, who's my running back 1 in this class. But if you are a team that like wants to win right now and you need a really multifaceted talent at the running back spot that can also catch passes and be really useful in the receiving game, maybe it's not so crazy to just get 3 really good years out of them and then see where it goes after that.
Yeah, you're talking about just a different calculus. Teams that have a different calculus of how they're viewing the position. And some of the things that you bring up, I think, that are important. Again, this is us psychoanalyzing the decision makers, but I brought it up with Ryan Pace, right? You're looking at Pittsburgh. This aligns Pittsburgh because they're just looking at a 1-year window. Really, the last year with Ben Roethlisberger, ETN seems like he's going to be in black and gold. Steelers send GM, head coach, offensive coordinator to his pro day. I don't think they're going to have anybody get ahead of him. Miami is an interesting team to bring up for running backs. But like you said, it's a, Kansas City is a team. I don't know if they go back-to-back first round in the running back, but maybe what they saw in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they already realized, like, okay, this isn't what we're looking for. Tampa Bay, even bringing back Leonard Fournette, those teams that have a luxury at the end of the first round. But I think you're probably right to say one may not get picked in the first round. Although I continue to be zeroed in on Harris at 18 to Miami just because they have 4 top 50 picks. Another thing you brought up, running backs' best years coming early in their career, right? I mean, it's not just that you're getting 3 great years in a 4-year contract out of a running back, and plus the 5th-year option is going to be cheap now. Like we're projecting ahead what 5th-year options are going to be for running backs, totally affordable. So really it's a 5-year deal that you're getting, and you're getting the best 5 years of their career. I mean, It's terrible. I don't know when I first said running backs need their own union. It's like we saw it coming. And that's where the free agent market becomes really interesting because Chris Carson got like $5.5 million a year. That's backup money at some positions. Yeah. And he's good. Aaron Jones got like 2 years on this contract at the same rate as like Adoree Jackson. I mean, Aaron Jones is way better at football than Adoree Jackson, right? Yeah. Poor running backs. Poor running backs. And really you have to wonder about Carolina with that McCaffrey deal. They were sniffing around, I think around Chris Carson. Was it Carson or maybe Jones? They were sniffing around a running back. And I wonder if they're looking at that contract and saying, if we can get out from under that. Because Dallas has the Zeke contract. And I don't know if you caught this, Chris, but the day that his salary got guaranteed was the day that folks were watching. And I mean, look, there was like a 0.2% chance they were going to cut him. But they're looking ahead down the line of his contract and thinking, if he's on the downslope of his career now, that don't feel good. All these second running back contracts are blowing up in these teams' faces. We'll see about Mixon. We'll see about Kamara. But it's sad. I like to take a moment out of pause running backs.
It is sad. I mean, we grew up with running backs being like the focal point of most NFL teams, and even into the 90s and the early 2000s with talk about fantasy, like LaDainian Tomlinson and Priest Holmes and Johnny Alexander. Like those were the guys scoring like 20 touchdowns a season. And now to kind of bring up a point that you said, the free agent market, the second contract market for those running backs, it's not going to be getting any more lucrative as we move into the future.
No. And it's this downward pressure. I'll say this. People talk about the NFL being a dinosaur organization and behind the times, but the hive mind of the 32 organizations and how they have gotten the right lessons from what's happening with running back pay and running back durability and running back career arcs. Like it's like an efficient market. They're reacting each year. I mean, it's amazing that Leonard Fournette. I mean, he was a Super Bowl hero. Those guys always get paid. He went back to Tampa and say, "Oh, I guess I'll take the same role for kicker money." You know, it continues, and you just fear. I mean, honestly, this is one of those things. If you are a talent at football, move to linebacker, move to cornerback, move to wide receiver.
Yeah,
do something, because it just looks terrible out there for running backs. Wide receivers, we've already touched on Waddle, Chase, Smith. I mean, do you see a big gap? Do you think having them kind of clustered into a tier worthy of a top 10 pick, does that speak to how level they are? Like the same way we were talking about Judy and Lamb last year, like basically in terms of wattage of talent, interchangeable.
Yeah, I think Waddle is the most talented just naturally, but in terms of just grouping them into a tier, I really think they're all elite wide receiver prospects. And it's just going to come down to scheme fit and what you want out of your wide receiver. I think Jamar Chase is a lot like Chris Godwin or A.J. Brown. Like he's physical at the catch point, yards after the catch. He's not going to run past a ton of people and juke out your entire secondary, but like he's a horse in the open field. Devontae Smith is just seemingly open on every play. You don't know how. He's very flexible and bendy. And then Waddle gives you the suddenness and, like you said, the ability just throw me the ball and I will get underneath of it. So I think it's just really going to come down to what your quarterback feels most comfortable with, what your offensive coordinator wants. But I think you can plug in any one of those three and you're getting a number one wide receiver right away.
Yeah, another outstanding class. And that's, by the way, speaking about efficient markets, the downward pressure on wide receiver salaries this year. It's the infusion of talent over the last 2 years. I talked about this last week, the specialization of the position. I think teams are getting much better at saying, what can this guy do, instead of trying to do square peg, round hole stuff with wide receivers.
Yep.
And then there's an interesting and varied talent group, again, kind of like last year. I don't think it's quite as deep as last year. I don't know if we'll see as many wide receivers go in the first 2 rounds as we did last year, but there's still a lot of talent. I noticed that on your big board March 1st that you had Rondale Moore pretty high. Now that was before 5.7, although I don't think that caught you by surprise or anything. Tell me, like, your take on Moore, and whether you think there's something to the idea that a team should have pause because of his height, because I think that's something that now I think has overtaken Devontae Smith's frame or weight, BMI, as the biggest question at the position.
I had him so high because with that big board on March 1st, it wasn't really factoring in anything else besides just on the field. It was just running through the film that I watched, through my grading system, and just very quickly I do it 5 categories for each position that are weighted differently. And I mean, it's subjectively what I think matters at the receiver position. And to go back to an early part of this conversation, that's changing every year. 10 years ago, it was all about, can you be a contested catch receiver? And now it's all about, can you separate and are you good after the catch? So just strictly based on what I saw on film, he was a top 20 talent to me. But I don't think the 5'7" at the pro day should really be that shocking, because he looks really tiny on film in terms of his height. But part of what is baked into why I think he's a top 20 talent in this class is that he's built so stocky that he's not a 5'9", 155-pound wide receiver that is going to go down on first contact every single time in the NFL. I think he is difficult to tackle because of how sudden and explosive and fast he is, and because of that contact balance and the strength that he has in his lower half. So no, he doesn't have a big catch radius, but if you're drafting Rondale Moore, you're trying to use him in that gadget type of way. Anytime he gets off coverage, you're throwing to him underneath with an option route, letting him just create after the catch. And then if someone gets in his face, you know that he can take the lid off the defense as well. So to me, the size for him, if he was someone that was winning consistently in jump ball situations at Purdue, you would say, 5'7" in the NFL is not going to cut it. But that's really not Rondale Moore's game.
I hope, and I talked about this when I talked about Moore before, that what's supposed to be an efficient market is the team that likes the player the most, i.e. they take the player, has a plan for that player that is based on seeing the player clearly instead
Yes.
of, again, not square peg round holing. And I love Eric Stoner. It's again, speaking of flattery, honor, just that Eric Stoner likes to hang out with us virtually. He's this future Jaguar, Rondale Moore, and that Meyer was. Sorry, Joe, erect every Saturday talking about him on the Fox pregame. But again, what I love, and this is why one of the reasons I love talking football with Eric Stoner, is that there is that soft skills, people skills, like incorporating into your picture. If you like the idea of envisioning all these different scenarios, and then when the pick is handed in, it's something meaningful because you've pondered all these different possibilities. What is, if they take this player, what does it mean about what they think about this, or how this fit is in this scheme and things like that? And it's especially interesting when it is like the Jags, when they have a new regime and we're learning for the first time, well, what's their plan going to be? And Rondale Moore, certainly one of those players, like you said, top 20 on tape, and there's durability issues too. So in some ways, the pick speaks to how are you going to use them, but in some ways it speaks to what about durability risk? What did your doctors say? And do you have these thresholds, these hard thresholds that say, well, arm length on a tackle shorter than this, and we move them off the board and things like that.
He can be Percy Harvin for Urban Meyer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's the thing too, that you also look at teams having success, or decision makers having success with similar players. So absolutely. So it may be Eric Stoner is on to something. We've mentioned Kyle Pitts a few times. Anything you want to add just to the growing chorus of folks talking about, there's a reason this guy's going to go as high at tight end since what? Vernon Davis, number 6. 2006. That's basically what we're looking at with Pitts.
Yeah, the one other thing that I don't think's been brought up too much, and I haven't caught all the analysis on Kyle Pitts, but it's everyone's just raving about him, and rightfully so. Watching him run routes, there's a lot of subtlety in his route running. He's not just this 6'6"
Noah Fant.
Yeah, he's not just 6'6" running in a straight line, not sudden, but you see against press coverage, he's like a pass rusher. He swims, uses his hands well. You can see that he changes speeds to kind of lull a safety or a corner to sleep before really turning on the jets or exploding out of his break. So we're getting not just Vernon Davis, that is a all-time freak of an athlete, or Noah Fant that's really fast in a straight line but lacks that wiggle. We're getting that, both of those elements in Kyle Pitts, and someone that is a very savvy route runner who's coming into the league very young. So that's why I think he's a home run of a tight end prospect that should go somewhere inside the top 10.
Yeah.
Very subtly intricate running routes. Like, he understands what he needs to do to win with more than just his athleticism.
Right. I think that one of the things that this point you bring up about him and why he puts him on a different level as a prospect is what I like to watch when I'm still trying to project and break these guys down when I have time to do it, is how good are they at receiving meaningful information from the action around them and then making a good decision, like loading up a good strategy as a response to that. And subtlety is so important when you're watching players, and it's one of those things that you don't need in college football, but you have to have in the pros. And it's where these trait-based prospects sometimes stall out in their development. So the things you describe, because changing speeds and routes, when I watch wide receivers and watch tight ends run routes year after year after year, if I don't see someone change speeds in their route, this is N'Keal Harry, this is JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and yes, I'm cherry picking examples. Because there are plenty of players that I'm wrong about too. But when you don't change speeds in your routes, because I didn't see Chase Claypool changing speeds in his routes either, but he's just that dominant physically to get away with it. I mean, that's his game is translating in a way that theirs hasn't. But seeing players, seeing how they respond to that information is a very underrated part to projecting them because of just the nature of the NFL. Who's give me another player, because I know how it is, because you're watching tape and you're watching them and you're watching them and you're watching them, and sometimes more than just to do your job and create content, you just gain an admiration for a player. as you've watched them? Who from this class have you started to admire as you watch them?
Probably to stay at wide receiver, Daz Newsome. That Diami Brown has been the guy like, oh, he's this vertical threat. And I think Brown is good on the vertical route tree and will be that kind of niche downfield threat. Daz Newsome in 2019 looked like the next first round pick in that group. And then in 2020, there's Javonte Williams, there's Michael Carter, there's the deep balls to Brown. He kind of got lost in the mix. But in terms of everything that we know that the NFL wants at wide receiver now, separation ability and yards after the catch skill, I think Daz Newsome, and we know that he's good in that area because he's so good as a kick and punt returner. I think he is like the wide receiver that is being lost in the mix. I have no idea where he's going to go. I wouldn't be surprised if he's available in like the 4th or the 5th or the 6th round. It would not shock me just because he had kind of a disappointing 2020. But in terms of traits, in terms of route running subtlety, changing speeds, head fakes, shoulder fakes, hip fakes, and then just being able to go from being at a dead standstill to top gear in about 3 to 5 yards, and then having the suddenness and the vision that we know is there from his return prowess. I think he's going to be one of the better value picks at the receiver spot in this entire class.
Love it. And the narrative too, like you getting lost in the shuffle, and this makes the draft stock depressed, but here's the game. And they say sometimes about players, you can be a better pro than college player, or otherwise what he has is going to translate better. So I love it. And wide receivers always deep. I mean, it's amazing. This is another group. What, Chris? There's potential starters like 15 deep in this class.
I think so. Yeah. 15 to 20.
Right. And again, this is why they're not paying wide receivers. I'll throw you just an open question because I know you've been covering the draft, but I know that you're also paying attention to free agency. Is there anything from the last month or really, I suppose this all really started with like the quarterback movement, like the Goff trade and the Wentz trade. In the NFL offseason so far, is there a move or a team or something that really stands out to you that has your attention?
Maybe some moves that haven't happened yet. I'm surprised that the Jets have not moved on from Sam Darnold, especially now that it's pretty much being telegraphed that they're going to pick Zach Wilson. And I think as every day gets closer to the draft, they lose more potential trade value in Sam Darnold and the Jimmy Garoppolo thing. I know what the 49ers have said, like, hey, we want Jimmy G as our starter, but we know teams say that until that guy is no longer their starter. They're going to say that 99 times out of 100. It seems like after that trade on Friday, that they could have probably offloaded Jimmy Garoppolo. So those two moves to me, without really having the time to think about all the free agency I've seen, those two, like I thought Sam Darnold would get moved like in that flurry of Carson Wentz and Matt Stafford and Jared Goff, like that we would see, hey, the Jets might still get a 2nd round pick for Sam Darnold. At this point, I think they would be fortunate to get that. So that move, probably more than anything else that hasn't happened, is the most surprising to me.
You're right to highlight that. You brought up Teddy Bridgewater earlier. Is he the next one that we add to this list? The lame duck quarterbacks, right?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because, I mean, Bridgewater doesn't have a low cap number this year. Garoppolo's cap number is around, $25 million. Yeah. Now, Darnold is not expensive, so maybe that changes the decision matrix a little bit. I almost wonder, Chris, if the Jets just aren't getting an offer better than a 4th-round pick, and they're looking at that and saying, well, we can probably get a comp 3rd or a comp 4th for him next year. I know they're not going to pick up the 5th-year option. Now that there's fully guaranteed 5th-year options, that's not going to happen, assuming he's on the roster right after the draft. Interesting choice too if you're trading for him. And that's the thing, trading for Darnold, is it even, I mean, you're adding another layer of decisions that you have to make. And teams like the Steelers, they got Ben Roethlisberger in place. The Bears got Dalton in place. I mean, they have a piece of their plan in place. And also from a financial standpoint, those teams are in terrible spots. And Darnold he's not expensive, but he's not cheap either. So I was talking with Josh ADHD today, and he said, we want to stick with Darnold. And the fascinating angle to that, I suppose, is if Darnold really balls out and you have this scenario where bringing in Wilson lights a fire under him, you can transition tag or franchise tag Darnold and trade him or find a way to get a deal done. So we'll see. But you're right that's definitely something we're gonna have to watch, because the Garoppolo thing, I just can't imagine keeping him for $25 million.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. It could go full circle to where we started. But yet they keep insisting they're going to.
Yeah, I think just like what you said, the difference between the price tag for Sam Darnold and Jimmy Garoppolo makes it seem like even if they pick Trey Lance, who is a little bit more of a raw prospect at the quarterback spot, that it wouldn't really make sense when you're a team that even is trying to win the Super Bowl, say in 2022, to keep Jimmy Garoppolo at that price tag. When you can call up Bill Belichick and he would maybe offer the best of any GM in the NFL for him.
Yeah, he'll make foolish deals, right? We saw that in free agency. And again, which again takes us full circle with why would there be a Mac Jones to number 3 smoke screen? And
I don't get it.
Yeah, that would be it, I guess, to make Bill Belichick, old man Bill, think, well, I'm not going to get my Tom Brady in the first round instead of in the 6th round in Mac Jones. We'll see. The wheel keeps on turning. Intrigue, folks. Chris's work, CBS. And now we got just like a few minutes to go off the rails, Chris. And since it's the first time here, I guess we'll go with the hits here. But specifically the draft, not just the NFL, the draft. Where does the obsession start for you? Can you remember when you realized like this stuff fascinates you and it even mesmerizes you, keeps your attention more than most football fans?
I don't know if I have a singular moment, but probably like everyone that is now doing some type of work with the NFL draft, I've always loved college football. Like Saturdays meant as much to me as a kid as Sundays, and I obviously grew up as a big NFL fan. I would say at Bleacher Report, when I was there in 2012, I did a live blog just covering the first round of the draft. And I thought it was so cool to be able to do that. It was kind of at the early stages of live blogging. And when I was saying like the Browns picked Trent Richardson at number 3 overall, it was like I needed to add more to it. And I had watched him at Alabama, and like everyone else, I thought he was going to be good. And that was even a little bit before we realized that the NFL needed to smarten up at the running back spot to not pick players at that position that early. But that was that whole experience for me doing that first round live blog for Bleacher Report. I felt like I needed to be able to add some of my own thoughts about these players. So the following year, pitch it to my editors like, hey, can I watch some film and like put out just like top 5 prospect rankings for each position? And when they gave me that green light, I probably spent way too much time than I needed to on Geno Smith and Matt Barkley and EJ Manuel and that quarterback class. But like sitting there in 2012 and feeling like, hey, I'm not giving my reader enough information. I'm just pulling from other people saying what they think of Trent Richardson and Robert Griffin III and Andrew Luck and Matt Khalil, stuff like that. So I think that moment, although it was over hours, obviously, that draft night in 2012, I realized that I really wanted to dive into an entire class. And I started doing it in 2013 and have been doing it ever since.
And it's really rewarding.
It is.
It's really, really rewarding because when you understand a player's game, when you quote unquote get them, you probably aren't necessarily in any better position than you were at the beginning to predict whether they're going to be a success or a failure, because that's based on fit, because that's based on maybe stuff that's out of view from us. Like with Trent Richardson, I mean, it may not be that he failed because of whatever you cited on tape at Alabama. It's just that he wasn't dedicated. He just didn't have the dedication, the commitment necessary. Point being, when you understand these players' game on the field and who they are and where they're coming from, then what happens next is so much more meaningful. And all of these players' stories are pretty epic, and certainly their games and seeing how they translate, you also just learn by inference so much about football and what matters. And it's the same kind of task that the teams are taking on. You said you loved college football. Who did you root for? Who were your teams or players growing up?
It doesn't make any sense geographically, but my dad is a big Michigan fan.
Okay.
So like Tim Biakabatuka, Tyrone Wheatley, Charles Woodson. I actually went, my dad took me, this was like the trip of a lifetime for me, took me to that Ryan Leaf Rose Bowl when Michigan won. Charles Woodson had the interception in the red zone or in the end zone when I was like 7 or 8.
Yeah.
So that like really made me like I guess lifelong Michigan fan. So that's kind of who I grew up rooting for, although we had no family connections. We never, but he just always liked Michigan. So that was a team that I always rooted for as a kid.
Well, it makes sense too because of the emotional connection you have to that. Because you called it a trip of a lifetime.
It was.
What I automatically think of is just how truly awe-inspiring the Rose Bowl,
It was
packed to the brim with people out of their minds, would strike you, that to experience it live in person and be overwhelmed by that. It's one of the good things about things starting to thaw with COVID is, I mean, sports have been there to give us something to pass the time or distract us, but it's just not the same without the crowd, and the crowd plays a role in the outcome. Yeah.
huge. Absolutely.
I mean, momentum is real. Yeah.
I think it is. I think the players, I mean, we're in this era where we want to quantify everything. And I don't think that will ever be quantifiable, or at least my brain can't wrap around quantifying that. But I think every player is a human being that goes through an emotional roller coaster during a game. And it's funny watching some of these opt-out players that I'm watching 2019 film, like Michigan, Penn State in 2019, like Penn State gets out to a big lead, Michigan comes back, like that. You could see it in the players' eyes inside their helmets, like what type of emotional ride that was for Penn State to get up and then blow the lead, but then hold on in the end inside Beaver Stadium. So I think absolutely momentum and just the impact that a crowd can have on the psyche, both good and bad, for a home team and for an away team is definitely real.
Yeah, it's that connection. It's that mass consciousness that you can get tapped into. So I get it. I get why the Wolverines, but the other shoe dropped like later on when you watched the Appalachian State game. You had that always waiting for you. I don't know why that just will live on in my mind, Chris, is the archetype college football upset. I guess also because of the setting, because the way it all went down. And I get it. What's on the t-shirt behind you on the shelf there?
T-shirt. It's a little banner. It says, "Who has more fun than Buffalo?" It's like a Bills thing. My wife got it for me after the Bills playoff run this past year. My dad he's been a season ticket holder since they opened the stadium in '72. So the Bills run pretty deep in this family too.
Oh yeah, it was hard. It was a hard end to the season, but I think it was one of those things. I thought of it like Mount Everest, Chris. If I was rooting for the Bills, honestly, if the Bills were playing the Steelers, I might have been conflicted. I know, but I was rooting. I feel like Pittsburgh and Buffalo are like related, like cousins as cities, and their relationship with their football team and so on. Although there's a lot more love in the Buffalo's heart for the Bills. The Steelers fans are fickle. But I felt like it was like climbing Mount Everest, and they got to a point on the mountain where there's just less oxygen. And they realized like we're not prepared for this. I just feel like mentally, emotionally, they were just not prepared for the size of the stage. But I hope that this year shows that they gathered themselves and are ready.
Yeah, I think that was my biggest takeaway from that AFC title game. Like, could see it in Josh Allen's eyes, and I think even Sean McDermott. Yes,
McDermott, maybe McDermott more than Allen.
And that was the one thing going into that game. I thought the Bills were going to win, and that was strictly as an analyst. I thought the Bills were going to win. Getting inside the 5-yard line twice and deciding to kick field goals, that's not what the Bills had done all season. And then I think McDermott kind of puckered a little bit and it was too big for the two most important people on the field, the head coach and the quarterback. So I think it was a good learning experience. But you can see even without fans, and there were some fans there, but not a packed Arrowhead Stadium, that those moments can really change the characteristics that we've seen over 16, 17, 18 games of a team, its quarterback and its head coach.
Yeah. Let us pray because I love the Bills team, but it was just a lot, I think, for them. And they hadn't exactly been playing A+ football in the games leading into that. But you will always get A+ draft coverage and other football wonders. Chris Trapasso, CBS. And the NFL draft, folks, I mean, we've had free agency. It's settled down. That's right. So what are you going to be doing the night of the draft?
Night of the draft, I'll just be writing like quick recap articles to big trades that happen. But And I'm pretty sure I'm locked into this again. The last 2 years, I do the live grades for CBS Sports from round 2 to round 7, which is like a huge undertaking, but I absolutely love doing it. It's like you were talking about nerding out on the draft front. Like that is definitely nerding out, but anything for the CBS Sports draft tracker from round 2 to round 7, Pete Prisco hands it off to me. Any of the grades you'll see, and 2-3 sentences on each pick, and then a great letter grade. That's kind of my like Super Bowl every year with the draft.
Awesome. Nerd out with Chris. Nerd out with us. We love doing it with you folks always because